to order the Brainerd Park Board meeting, City of Brainerd at City Hall, 501 Laurel Street, City Council Chambers. Tuesday, January 24th, 2023 at 4 p.m. And I think we just need a roll call.
Jonathan Miller,
Present.
Kara Schaefer,
Yes.
Andrew Scheip,
Here.
Kevin Yeager,
Yes.
and Troy Rushmeyer.
Yes. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, I think we're going to start off with the oath of office here for Jonathan Miller.
Jonathan Miller,
I, Jonathan Miller,
do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States,
do solemnly swear I will support the Constitution of the United States,
the Constitution of the State of Minnesota,
the Constitution of the State of Minnesota,
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties
and I will faithfully discharge the duties
of the Office of Brainerd Parks and Recreation
of the Office of Brainerd Parks and Recreation
of the City of Brainerd, Minnesota,
of the City of Brainerd, Minnesota,
to the best of my judgment and ability, so help me God.
to the best of my judgment and ability, so help me God.
Don't turn him back now.
Welcome.
That last sentence is the key.
Yeah.
You can really stretch.
Yeah, you could really, there's a lot of give.
Okay, we will move on from that to it is time for election of new officers, President and Vice President. Does anyone have a nomination? Don, I heard you say something about being president.
No, I don't have any sort of recommendations or any,
Anyone down on that end?
I think, isn't Kevin Prez because he was vice pres last year? Or that does not work like that?
It doesn't have to. So
Oh, okay.
technically, it can go from one to the next, to the next,
Oh,
to
sure.
the next. Last year, I think you and Andrew had said you really weren't interested. If I recall,
Yeah.
correct?
Yep.
So if that's still the case, then, we can swap. But if you guys have some interest, then
Be happy to give it a crack.
as the president,
Sure.
okay? In that case, I will nominate Andrew Scheip to be the president of the Brainerd Park Board. Any concerns? Questions? Do we have a second?
second.
Second from Jonathan, and then I think we could just do the vice president at the same time, correct?
Yep.
Isn't that on? There we go. Is that better?
You may be a little neater to just do one and then do the other one.
You want to do one at a time? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. None being heard, motion carries. We have a new president of the Brainerd Park Board. And now we will do the vice president. Do we have a nomination for that office? Kara, are you interested?
Sure.
Yes.
I could be if no one else is interested.
Well, you've held them both before.
have,
I mean,
yeah.
you
So I
aren't,
don't
you aren't a rookie.
Take too many times,
Okay, unless someone had someone else in mind. You want to hold or what?
Works for me.
Okay. Any questions, concerns?
Just as long as that means I do not have to be president next year,
It does not mean that.
Okay.
But you do have to fill in if Andrew
though.
gets sick.
Yes.
Or says, I just don't want to do this anymore.
Yep, got it.
But, okay, well, we have a motion for Kara.
Yep, I'll second.
Motion and a second. No further discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. None being heard. We also have a new vice president of the Brainerd Park Board. Congratulations, you guys, and good luck. We will do our best to support you.
Absolutely.
I think you take over right now, correct?
It does.
Andrew? It's all yours, buddy.
Sure. Yeah, next we have approval of the agenda.
Motion to approve, Yeager.
I will,
Schaefer.
Cool. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. agenda is approved. Moving on to item 6, consent calendar. Do we have to read the notice? Okay. All matters listed are considered routine by the board and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless good cause is shown prior to the time the board votes on the motion.
Motion to approve, Yeager.
Miller.
Discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Consent calendar is approved. Moving on to 7A, new business. We have, I think, James with tree planting and Jesse.
Yes, sir, Mr. New Board Chair. So at the last meeting, the Park Board requested that staff put together a general quantity species placements of trees within the park system for our 2023 tree order. So staff had a chance to visit out on the site between us, James, Troy, take a look at the different parks and what our recommendations were. And I'll let James kind of elaborate a little bit at once in your memo with the recommendation from staff.
Thank you, Jesse. Brent, if you could pull up the map of, we'll be discussing Memorial Park first. So I don't have a landscape program to plot the trees, but we did take GIS and then try to mark in red where we're talking about potentially some of these tree plantings. So along the ice rink, Park Board directed staff to try to come up with an idea along the south side of the ice rinks to potentially provide shade over time as the trees grow. In conversations with the park's maintenance supervisor, Troy, he did potentially want to stay away from pine trees, not spruce trees, just because of near some of the recreational fields there and recreational facilities. He's worried about the needles. So staff is recommending kind of in the, if you see it right here, kind of in the corners, doing a staggered planting of Siouxland poplar. About 10 feet apart. So this particular variety of tree is not cotton bearing. It's a seedless variety of poplar. Also has extremely fast growth habits on there. So, I did take a look at that as well. If you're looking at, certain other types of trees like oak, you might have a foot, maybe 6 inches to a foot a year of growth. Where you go to a Siouxland poplar, you could be potentially up to 3 feet of growth per year. So that would help provide some protection from kind of that west afternoon sun, and maybe potentially be able to do it faster than other varieties. We'd be looking at doing a dense kind of staggered planting in kind of those corners of the rink. And then if you picture kind of the straighter parts of the south side of those rinks there, potentially planting spruce trees in that location. It is a little bit closer to the power lines, and I do believe that spruce trees, they do take a while to grow, but are more of a narrow, upright type of evergreen tree, so it won't potentially hinder those power lines as much in those locations. Troy also talked about added benefits of spruce trees in there, potentially buffering kind of some noise impacts from basketball courts in the summer as well as ice rinks in the winter, but spaced far enough to where they're not a complete dense hedge of evergreens there, but just kind of nicely spaced in there to provide some additional kind of noise buffering to the neighborhood. So that was the recommendations there. We did take a look at, if you go between fields, I think 1 and 2, Troy showed us the trees that are lining in there and what's kind of growing in between the light poles there. It was his recommendation and really Park's recommendation to remove the trees in there as they're pretty much growing into the lights at this point. One of those varieties is a silver maple. It's probably only at about 1/3 of its really growth of where it's at right now, so it's going to get another 3 times taller than where it already is. If that is something that the Park Board would like to do, I think staff's recommending replanting in that area with some upright crabapple trees that wouldn't grow into the field, but would provide shade over time for those spots. So kind of some future planning for that area if that is something that the Park Board would like to see. Also recommended kind of in between the concession stand, there's kind of a large blank area there, starting with a very nice bald and burlap tree that would provide kind of west shade from the bleachers. So then from there, it'd be, I think, field 3. I did put a kind of a dash line along the south side of field 3 up there. After talking to Katie about that, I think we'd probably take some recommendations from Troy along there to work 5 trees along that field to provide some added shade. And then you can kind of see those parking lot islands that are in there. Staff also has a recommendation to plant some deciduous trees in those parking lot islands just to provide some afternoon shade for vehicles as well as kind of beautify the parking lot. So I guess before we move on to the next part, just kind of wanted to get your guys' thoughts on that planting plan.
If I may, just quick expand on the trees between fields 1 and 2. I know we discussed this back last fall about the encroachment of those trees into the fields with issues with deadfall issues, the shading with the lights out there. So looking at what it would need to trim those back to the fence line, the concern is what are those trees going to look like for one, and are they going to survive a trimming of that amount? So we felt like the potential, if we were to just remove those trees and replace with a species that one will branch out at least a canopy that is big enough to provide shade, but also not so large that it would start encroaching on the fencing again. So just kind of a more targeted approach on the species and making sure that we put the kind out that maybe fit that space a little bit better.
Yeah, Troy.
Thank you, guys. I think locations are good. Question on the rinks. Are the deciduous trees going to provide enough shade? I know you had mentioned that they have a pretty good canopy.
It is, there is concern. Obviously deciduous trees are going to lose their leaves during the winter time. So it would create opacity to the ring still with some of that branch structure, and the idea of trying to plant them closer together and staggering, I think would help as well. But yeah, that is, is that going to be enough is kind of the question. One of the benefits, again, is kind of the fast growth as well. And then over time, those spruce trees should provide, you're looking at years down the road, but would provide almost that full screen to the south sun there. So it's kind of a 2-layered approach there of trying to do something to provide, maybe shade in 7 to 10 years. Option 2, there would be enough in the budget to, instead of doing those, to plant potentially like a red pine that does grow fairly fast. But it is going to be a longer amount of time, that you're looking at potential shade there. So I think there would be option in the budget if the park board would rather go to like a pine tree in that corner.
And one thing we did discuss out on the field was the issues that we've been having with the melting on the north end of that would be the west rink. It would be a huge challenge to find trees that, within the next 40 years are going to be tall enough to shade that north end. It would be very difficult for us to find something.
And in reality, aren't we really looking at afternoon sun versus morning sun on those rinks? So, even more westward trees. The temperature's gonna be what it's gonna be. It sounded like I talked to Troy, and it sounded like you haven't had as many issues this year with the ice melting as past. I know there was some talk last year about the concrete still curing, but Katie, I don't know what you have to say, but it sounded like, one, there's a lot of people going to the ice rinks, which is fabulous. 2, we have trees that we have to plant that are not gonna be immediate fixes, and I think we all recognize that. I just wanna make sure that we have, one, trees that are gonna provide shade eventually, and 2, how close can they be before they start affecting the rinks in a negative manner as far as pine needles and leaves in the fall? Are these trees gonna hold their leaves till middle of winter like some trees do, or are they're gonna drop them all?
They're going to drop them in the fall.
Okay.
Oaks are really the ones that kind of have the leaves that would persist in the wintertime.
Do you mind if I walk to the thing and just ask, as far as these trees in between here, I can see where, Katie, these are becoming a real problem. And my other thought is eventually, and it doesn't have to be this year, but something for us to look at is maybe beautification and shade that we could provide back here off the fence line a little bit also. But also for this, would it be helpful to plant some trees along here? Can we do that? That would also provide some shade later.
I think that's what's out, kind of near the park, but there's.
Our pond is really close there. Our, on the left side or on the west side of the pond, Troy?
Is there some trees there now?
There's some, yeah. Not much, though.
Okay. Otherwise, I think what you guys have, I think is, I just had those questions as far as the shade and the, but I don't know if anyone else has anything, but.
Just real quick, Mr. Chair, if I may, please. Thank you. Just a couple thoughts here. I do love the idea of putting the trees in the kiosks. This was going to be where I would like to see them, is in those little patches of the parking lots, just to help soften our parking lots, make that look a lot better. So obviously that one that is not red, I know why we can't put anything in there. We have peace in there. How about the next two down? Is it possible to get into those?
I thought about that. Jesse, do you remember were they snow plowing that straight through?
We typically put the berms of snow right up in those two islands.
But we could alter the way we plow the parking lot, correct?
We could. We'd probably block off the further east and just kind of make a wall of the berm there.
Right. So that was going to be my thought, is to see if we could get into those two lower kiosks there. At one time, when we were working on the planning of the splash pad, we talked about potentially trees on the outfield, in between the outfield fence and the splash pad, just in case we had any balls. Do we know if we had any issues with balls getting into or over that center field fence?
Oh, yeah.
Into the splash pad area? And if it is, are trees the right choice, or should we just use some netting out there? Because ideally we don't want our splash pad in shade either. I totally get that. So I guess that was the only couple things that was jumping out to me. I'm not super crazy about tearing down the trees in between the fields, especially when you're just going to put trees back. But I don't play out there. I totally get it. That's somewhat of the character of these two fields. I totally get it. That people would love to have them not out of there, and if they're an issue with the lighting, I just don't know enough about that to say whether they are or not. But I'm a proponent of having the fields basically encircled in trees, even all the way down that corridor, if it works, and we can keep them, working with the lighting and so forth. So that's all I have, Andrew.
Cool. Garrett? So I actually really appreciate your comment about the field one. I believe it's field one. Field one is the south field, correct? Field one, the splash pad trees, because that was a conversation that we had. And if you recall, the netting was very expensive.
Yep.
So if that's something we could solve, even if it's not a huge issue, if the ball just goes 15 feet over the fence, and we've got a 15-foot tree, that could be, it also looks nice.
I agree.
The poplar trees that you had down on the ice rinks, I think that's a really nice look. I'm a huge fan of cedars because I like that tall, narrow look, so the poplars are nice. Would obviously be a summer tree as opposed to a winter tree. I don't know if that makes a difference or not for the shade. I don't know I think you're probably right that that's not gonna affect too much shading for those, no matter how high we get, unless we're getting 100 feet up there. The one comment I have about the trees in between the fields, I'm a huge proponent of the trees being in between the fields. I don't mind the idea of replanting different trees, but if our fear is that they may not survive the trimming, if we're gonna plant trees, why don't we plant some trees and trim the trees at the same time if we're looking to grow more trees, and just space them out and see if we can't see what the survival rate of one of those trees are, if we're just planning on removing it anyways.
But, if I may. I think it's okay to take those trees out of there, but then let's plant some, if not this year, but eventually be looking at planting them along first and third baselines and around the outside of the, the home run areas even. I mean, beautification, shade, it gives people more places to sit and watch the game. And then, in reality, I'm really surprised that nobody, especially adults, in there having a few beverages, have not caught one alongside the head real bad in between the fields there. Foul balls and whatnot. So, I mean, in reality, what those fields really need is my opinion, they need a protection net to run down through the middle of that, but
But that's super expensive and not sustainable. The difference with, right now, nobody's getting hit in the head because there's trees there. And so the trees are acting as though the net, and at least giving that mild amount of protection. The problem with the net, and this is what I had when we were talking about doing it over the home run side, it's $50,000 and it lasts what, 20 years? I mean, it's an excessive continuation of fields that we just learned, $400,000 for lights. At what point do you just stop adding things to these and start looking for natural ways in which you have? That's the one advantage of the trees.
yeah, unless they interfere with what you're there for.
Well, and that's,
What you're there for, then they're not doing you any good.
and I'm not saying that they don't. I'm just saying that if the fear is that we can't trim them, if we're going to remove them, take a shot at it. See what happens with the trimming of the tree. You know, if we're gonna plant another tree, plant one 2 feet down from it and see what happens. You know, whatever we can do. Obviously, I found from my own experience that planting a tree on top of the tree you just removed is a very effective way to keep your tree growing. So there is a advantage to that. But I hate to see the trees just removed and then us plopping in something that's gonna take 10 years to then grow. Because the one problem with this park is it is very, very windy. And we are just slowly taking out more and more of that wind protection. So the more of it we can get back in there, I'd like to see.
The one concern I'd have about trimming and having the new plantings next to it would be, the taller they do potentially grow, the more expensive it'll be to remove, but the potential for damaging the new trees when you're downing the old trees if they do die, that'll be a challenge. I mean, you live it for a contractor, but it'll cost us quite a bit if we tell them, take these down, but don't damage the crab apples next to them.
Well, you got a lot of other stuff to not hit while you're over there. So you got a fence that's 2 feet away from it.
Well, what would you guys think about planting trees along the baselines on those fields instead?
Down through the middle, correct, Troy, is what you're saying? You take out the trees and you
Well, we
plant
could
a
do
strip
that
the
further
middle,
down
Right?
and/or out between the parking lot and that space. So on the west side of the fields, to add trees along, there's nothing there.
I think there's one maybe on the south field, one or two.
there's a
kinda
couple
down the-
there.
Yeah, down through there. Right
Right
there.
there, yep, and then a couple by that old pavilion, but I'm talking like down the baselines, there's kinda nothing, and I think as far as if you want shade, you're probably gonna, more people sit along those edges probably than anywhere else at those fields. So would it be worth looking at planting them there instead of back where those other ones are and do what Mayor Bordeaux is saying, try to trim those up? I don't know.
Do we know the distance, so we could maybe pull that up on GIS, the distance between the fence of the field and the parking lot, just to make sure that nothing's encroaching
Pretty
into the
big on the
fence?
south, on the
Fairly-
north field, I'd say it's down to about 15 to 20 feet. On the south field, it's more like 40 feet, 30 feet.
From the parking lot to where your fence line is? Okay.
I think there's a fairly good distance, every bit as much as in between the fields, I think more. There's more there than there is in between the fields, I'm pretty sure.
So yeah, so a couple options. Either budget-wise, you could either take something, away from this one, or, potentially take what we had planned for Gregory's deciduous trees, and move that into, planting along the north and we can do deciduous trees kind of based on size from fence to parking lot and make that determination of what would work best. If we're down to 15, 20, you're looking probably an ornamental tree. If you got 30 to 40, you can do a medium-sized shade tree, something like that. So we could certainly put that together and maybe take from the budget of Gregory Park and add some to this one. Or take some from the budget from JC's, which we'll present next.
Yeah, should we look at the next two parks and then maybe circle back to,
Works for me. Sure.
cool.
Okay, Brent, if you could pull up the next map. So here's JC's Park. Go down to so we looked at, kind of the future plans of this, so kind of in the middle of those ball fields again, doing some tree plantings as well as the north field. You can see kind of next to the dugout, along that whole side. There really isn't any trees in that area compared to what the south field has. So when I was speaking to Public Works Director Dean, trying to replicate on that north field what is kind of going on in the south field. Also, we talked about the master plan for this park, how the parking lot's going to kind of swing around and be kind of along the west side. And then move from that area, and then there's going to be a soccer field in this area. So we talked about also lining trees along the soccer field, our future soccer field on the be on the west side there. And then with the new playground in that area, also adding kind of between both playgrounds, the one moved up on the north there, and then the new playground to the south there, doing about 8 deciduous trees around there to provide some shade as well. So we kind of looked at lineal feet here, as well as planting approximately 20 feet apart, doing the 8 trees in the park area. So we're looking at approximately 25 deciduous 15-gallon trees for this one. So when I was talking to Troy, he was concerned somewhat about a high water table here. I don't think it's going to impact any type of tree growth that we would choose in here. I did recommend staying away from potential evergreens if there is a high water table here. What can happen is they can develop a shallow root system, and it becomes a little bit weaker, so you get a high windstorm and you'll see kind of the roots uplifting or the whole tree kind of falling over. So recommended for this one was to kind of stick to deciduous trees that do tend to like water a little bit more. So that's kind of shown in the plant species that I had recommended. With that, I certainly can answer any other questions.
Kevin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. James, with the trees that we're talking about planting in between where the field and the future parking lot goes, we're talking about potentially building up that parking lot a good 2 feet. Do you feel that there's a way we can put these trees in now and then not kill them off when we build up the athletic field?
We certainly would probably. So you're going to be building up the parking lot?
Well, I think the idea was that the parking lot was going to stay. We were going to build up the parking lot just enough to keep it dry, but then the field needed to come up even a little bit more. So I think there's maybe a 2-foot difference in between there. So I just want to make sure if we do plant the trees there that
If there's going to be substantial grading, I probably would not plant there.
Okay.
And maybe.
So what we can do is we're having, and I'll mention that here in my report, is Woodseth is getting us a price to help us with the ARPA project that's going to happen over at JC's. So as part of that project, we can identify where that line is going to be, and we can plan that at a future time after the work has been completed, and then come through and do that line between the parking lot and the field.
But this might be a candidate for those trees coming out of that line and going over back to our memorial conversation. Could be. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But I love the idea. I'll just jump in real quick. I just keep things moving. I love the idea of coming down in between the fields along the baselines again. I think it looks great. That's all.
I said one question, Jesse, I think. Would the money for the trees be able to come out of the ARPA money that's assigned for this project?
So the original ARPA request included trees in this project. I am concerned about how far that project budget is going to go with the original scope, because I believe the scope had the warming house, the walking trail, horseshoe pits, the soccer field, and the parking lot. Knowing what we've just paid for Kiwanis, I have a feeling that we're not going to get that far. So if we have an opportunity to maybe pull the trees out and use that with our normal tree budget, then we can focus those dollars on the other kind of bigger items like the parking lot and the soccer field and stuff.
Cool, thank you. Anything else for Jesse?
I just had 2 questions. One, the hockey rink, there's still going to be room there with those trees on that north. It's going to be close.
It's going to be close, but
North field. I just want to make sure that we're giving enough space because the hockey rink is right about there. I just want to make sure that we have space there for it. But I love the idea of putting trees there because as a parent that had T-ball there, it's exactly where trees need to be, right there. Perfect spot for them. And then I just want to say berms, baby, berms. Get some berms going up on that south side of that soccer field. Get them trees up on that, baby.
Sounds good. Cool, and then Gregory?
So Gregory, we didn't have a specific location where the trees would be planted. we did take a look at what the kind of the master plan was for it. We do have locations within that master plan for Gregory where trees do need to go. I know there was we wanted to create kind of a promenade along from the south side going into the center there where some additional trees had to be planted. So there is certainly within the master plan areas where trees need to be planted. We also lost some during the storms this past year. So we just kind of used the remaining budget within the tree planting for Gregory Park, recommending 6 8-foot B&B pine trees, and then 14 15-gallon deciduous trees to kind of help start filling in those locations in Gregory Park. And then I did list potential recommended species in there as well.
Yeah, Kevin.
I'd like to use the board here. If I can. I'd love to plant a row of trees right here. Bear with me. It kind of makes sense for a lot of the conversations that we're having. But if we were to plant a row of trees that basically went from right through there. What a hero.
Sorry, I'll say that into the mic. What a hero.
Nature's Ballard.
This would help us to be able to get I understand the snow removal thing. I know it's what's going to come up here. But we can get really creative with snow removal if we have to. But I believe that if we were just to simply close off that little section of park right there, that is the problem area for us. This is a passive way of doing it. You just pop some nice trees right down along that sidewalk. The staff would still be able to, come right down there. But really, people would no longer feel like they can just sneak through into that area between the pavilion and our warming shelter. So that, other than that, this park is, obviously it's a ton of trees in there and you almost couldn't screw that up with the trees as long as they grow well and all of that. But I'd love to see that happen right through that area. And I think it would solve a lot of our issues. Just throwing that out there.
Are you imagining the pine trees or the deciduous or some biggest trees we can get? Troy?
Yeah, I'm not opposed to that at all. I still want to see us follow through with our changing that to that entrance, just so we don't continue to have that same conversation that we've had for the last 3 years. But also, I think on our master plan, there's some trees on there along the two paths coming from the fountain area that I think would be nice locations for trees. Yeah. That's all I got.
I have one major request for this. So as I'm currently planning for Arts in the Park, just along exactly what you talked about, we've lost a lot of trees in that along those two sidewalks because they were elms and diseased and removed. It would be really nice if we could be very calculated about where we put the trees, and I think where they were was great. But specifically for our event, we use that as kind of our marker of where we put the tents back to. And I think we've had other events like the Pride stuff as well that puts their stuff along that pathway as well. It would just be nice to make sure we're being consistent with that distance, and then also just being very mindful of the distance between them, because for me, we're very calculated. A space is 12 feet, and then, if we can map that out really nice, it would just be nice to be able to make that very mathematical.
Would it be good maybe to flag it prior and then have community action come out and take a look at it? And
Yeah, I mean, and I don't want it
because
to
I think that'd be great guidance.
Yeah, I don't want it to be about us, but I know that we've watched other events that have kind of mimicked that now, and it's just a really good guiding point where this is the front end of your booth that gives you enough space off the path, and then just making sure there's enough space in between them. So I would love to just give, not necessarily guidance, but just a recommendation on that, just to try and make sure that it's usable.
I think if you look too at where Kevin has these placed on the master plan, they're placed systematically in a uniformed order.
Yep, yeah, that would just be my main concern, is just making sure that it's very tight math.
So with that, again, the memo kind of summarizes the species recommendation, and then we just put together essentially 3 recommended budgets for each park. Again, if you wanted to have more trees at Memorial, just give us an advice on which one you would like to take away from, if that's taking away from Gregory or taking away from J.C.'s, or keep it as is, or however the park board would like to see those trees planted through the 50,000 we have available.
If I may, Andrew? Karen, go ahead. Sorry.
So are berms considered trees? I mean, they're not, but like if we, in the budget, would they be in that same budget? No.
No.
What budget is that in? Grass?
Yeah, I don't know what you guys would consider that, but no, I was the person pushing for these trees to get within the budget, specifically for trees. We want to make sure that it is tree purchasing.
So I can help
I
a
would
little
just
bit
be
with, so there is not a budgeted amount for grading to create berms.
Yep.
We will have an opportunity to look at grading with the J.C.'s, the ARPA project there, because we'll have to do some grading for the parking lot, the soccer field, and the pleasure link that was in the master plan. So there's going to be some grading there. I don't know if we'll have a ton of extra material, but we'll be able to do some more survey and figure out if we have extra material that we could look at throwing a berm on the south side of the soccer field or on the sides of the baseball fields.
Thank you.
Troy?
I would like to make a motion to take the budgeted trees from around the proposed soccer field area in J.C.'s Park and move those to Memorial Park and plant them along the west side of fields 1 and 2. If there's room allotting for that.
Is there a second for that?
Maybe I'll add to that motion to say, can we look at pruning the trees that are in between the fields as well before taking them out? Because we know once they're gone, but.
Mr. Chair, I have something that I would either like added to the motion, or I can make a secondary motion. It's totally up to you. But I would like to add that as a part of this motion, we include the planting of the trees in between the pavilion and the warming house at Gregory. So it's up to you if you'd like to amend the motion, or I can make a secondary motion.
I'll add that to my motion.
Oh, fantastic. I'll second that thing right now.
Any discussion? Yeah.
Can't tell, okay. What about those two little spots in the parking lot at Memorial that we mentioned? Is that
The kiosks.
the kiosks? Yep. Is that a possibility as well to add to your motion? Or are we getting at too many trees now?
You're talking about the south two that aren't marked?
Right, yep.
We could potentially plan for an additional 2 there. I think we probably would, budget-wise. I think conservative on it. I think we could put 2 more deciduous trees in there and still come in budget-wise without having to take from an additional park.
Yeah, I was running the quick math. It looks like you're gonna steal roughly about $5 to $6 grand out of J.C.'s to put towards Memorial. That sound about right? We had 13 in J.C.'s before, so maybe 5's coming out along from the parking lot.
Oh, yeah, I have a question about that specifically. Is the plan to look at trees in the future and to design it so that trees could be put there?
Yeah.
So we're not just wiping it off the board, we're just pushing it back because we don't know what it's gonna look like. Okay, that's what I
I
just.
think we put
I don't
those
know what
in
it's
once
gonna
we,
look like, but we have to.
we put those in once we got our,
Look at it, grade it,
our field
elevate it,
and driveways
figure it out
done.
from there. Perfect.
So I believe, Troy, your motion had 2 amendments, one from Kevin and then one from Kara for the 2 little kiosks. Is that your understanding?
Absolutely. That's what it had.
Just,
We'll even throw in a horseshoe pit if it'll keep her canines from growing any bigger.
I'll get my horseshoe pit eventually.
Is there any further tree discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
Thank you,
A
guys.
is done. On our way to J.
Much appreciated.
Oh, man.
Absolutely. Cruising now. Item 7B, discussion on emerald ash borer. Guessing that's you, James.
Yep, thank you. So the Community Development Department received an Emerald Ash Borer grant to manage EAB in Brainerd's public trees. The department has completed step 1 of the grant program, which was constructing an interactive GIS map displaying tree size, species, quality, and location. The next step in the grant program is writing an EAB policy for public tree management. This includes trees located in the right-of-way, as well as city parks. So did want to get park input on this. Obviously, this will have to be approved by city council as well. But as I was talking with a potential expert in here, there's certainly different options within an EAB management policy that would be added to our city tree policy. So really there's 3 options. Removing all ash trees over a period of years within the city and replace them with other varieties of trees. Removing distressed ash trees and replacing them with other tree species, removing select ash trees in locations with high density and treat/inject desirable trees, or option 3, remove only distressed trees and treat/inject all other ash trees. So staff is recommending option 2, which is kind of a layered approach to it, taking away the ones that are really distressed, and then also areas where there's maybe a high quantity of ash trees, trying to thin some of those and replant with some other trees. So right now, emerald ash borer is in the St. Cloud area, so it's not in Brainerd yet. There's a lot of cities in southern Minnesota that didn't really have a policy in place or wasn't really ready for it. You know, the benefit here is we kind of saw what happened to some of the other cities there, that once it did hit, it was just like what happened with the elm trees back a number of years ago, where it hit within the city and pretty much every tree died and all the trees had to be removed, and there really, you know, looked like areas that were like almost like a bomb went off. There was nothing left in those areas. So this is really a management plan to figure out, okay, what plan do we have going forward? What do we want to see in these areas? So one park I wanted to particularly kind of focus on or make Park Board aware of would be Kiwanis Park. So obviously a very nice shaded park. You know, I enjoy the shade there around the entire playground area. There's a lot of nice trees, but every one of those trees there are ash trees from when they were planted. So if emerald ash borer were to hit and we didn't have a plan for that area where we're injecting them or doing something, there's potential to lose every tree in that area. So with that, I do want to take, or at least get some discussion from Park Board, as well as some potential direction on how we'd write this RFP. For what we'd probably be doing is contracting with a company to work on a tree policy for the city of Brainerd. So I wanted to get your input on your guys' thoughts on how we would proceed with the ash trees within parks.
Any question, Troy? Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, so it sounds like if these ash trees are densely populated, that it just runs rampant when it hits.
It does.
So by thinning them out, one tree in that area may get it, but it's more controllable as far as then spreading to a mess of trees in one spot, correct?
That's correct. And, you know, if we don't have emerald ash borer for another, 5 to 10 years. I don't know how fast it's going to spread up into the area or really start affecting the trees. You're starting to maybe thin a few in the highly populated areas where you might then replant with something else in that location, some other type of tree species. So all of a sudden you have a 10-year-old tree in there versus having to really start fresh if you have to cut all of them down. And I think there is a potential then to also, some of this grant money can be used for injections. It sounds like the parks actually did purchase a few years ago some potential equipment to do injections ourselves. So we could look more into that as well. But you can inject each spring to prevent some of your most desirable trees from getting emerald ash borer. Pretty tough to do across the entire city, but something you probably would want to do for some of those Kiwanis tree parks, so you're not losing some of your best shade trees.
Kevin?
Thank you. James, couple quick questions. How effective is the treating for trees? How much does it cost? And then is this something you have to do every year in perpetuity?
It is something you have to do in perpetuity. We don't have any cost estimates on that at this time. That'd be kind of the next step after this policy, or maybe in conjunction with it. I have been approached by a few tree companies that would be willing to provide quotes for that. So it is something you have to do in perpetuity, though.
Understood. And is it highly effective?
It is pretty effective in treating that.
That's all.
So we have the grant? Are we approved for the grant?
Yeah, so right now it's a 3-year grant. So part of it was we had to get some software for this GIS mapping system, and then we'd probably be using part of the grant money to write this policy, and then some of the grant money could be used for potentially removing an ash tree and planting it with something else, or can be used for that year for some of the injections for potentially say this spring. And then there's a lot of other once this one runs out. There's a lot of EAB grants out there. There's other communities, maybe even further north, that aren't taking advantage of some of them. So I know there is a lot of money where we could potentially, even apply for another grant.
Okay, so if we were to inject the trees yearly, like you were mentioning, is that, we could spend all of our grant money and like the injection the product is good for 5 years, or is it, something you have to buy each year and then it expires?
It is something that you would have to essentially, either we have the equipment and we have to look at the chemical on what it would cost and train somebody in the Parks Department to use. I think we do have a tree injector from what Troy was saying. Or there's tree companies that could provide that service as well. So I can get a price on what that would be. And certainly let Park Board, have that information on what it would cost to inject. For instances, there's, probably 5 trees in Gregory Park, very spaced out. And when I was working on the tree inventory with our intern, noticing that the ash trees were really distressed in Gregory Park. They were having troubles. I don't know if it was drought tolerance. It might have just been a bad year for rain. But, that might be an instance where you could get rid of half of them and just replant them and not really have an issue with the ash tree then in that park. Kiwanis is probably the one really we don't have a lot of ash trees in our other parks. It's mainly that one that looks like the biggest issue. So I don't think it'd be something that we'd have to look at every single park. It's going to be a major budget to where we have 30 ash trees in this park, 30 in this one, 30 in this one. I think it's mainly Kiwanis that we'd be looking at having do the injections potentially.
So my second thought would be, do the ash trees happen to fall into like along the path where our master planning, we want to clear out some of that and thin it out so people can actually have access to the river?
Both sides, the river and Boone Lake.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if they're back there, or are we only talking right in the park?
So we're really only talking about maintained areas. So if there was ash trees that or trees to thin out in some of those areas where you want better access, I would say ash trees should be the first one to go. But we didn't do any mapping in like the heavily forested areas. It was really just mapping in the areas that were maintained.
Is it possible for a healthy ash tree to survive the ash borer, or is it, because you mentioned kind of addressing distressed trees first. Do they help the bug propagate, or is that just they'll die very quickly and become a hazard?
Really, from what I've learned, really a healthy ash tree, I don't believe can withstand it. They did find over time that there were certain types of elm trees based on kind of their genetic makeup, that they were more resistant to like Dutch elm's disease. But I haven't heard that that's a case for ash trees. It pretty much affects all 3 species of ash tree, and really a healthy tree. Certainly healthy trees can maybe delay getting disease. Unhealthy trees that are struggling are going to be the first ones to go. But yeah, that injection is something that certainly treats the bug that causes the emerald, the ash borer.
Cool, thanks.
Yep.
I'd like to make a motion to move forward with option number 2.
I'd second that motion.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. The option 2 is approved. Next is,
Thanks for your work on that.
Yeah.
yeah, that's
I can't wait to see the map. Is the map up and live?
I don't think it's live for like a public, but yeah, we have it available to take a look at.
Awesome.
Yeah.
cool. Item 7C, discussion on parks lighting standards.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. So this is just kind of a follow-up of a previous conversation and maybe a little bit more expanded. There was a discussion about color temperature standards, and we had that work group that you guys were participating in, and really appreciative of that. From that work group, it was pretty widely accepted that they wanted to recommend adopting a citywide standard of a 3,000 Kelvin color temperature standard. So expanding on that a little bit is just kind of adopting a parks lighting standard for all of our parks moving forward of what lighting looks like. And I believe from my conversations with Paul Sandy is the Mississippi Landing Park was kind of, I'll call it a trial run where the lights placed there was kind of the intention of what could possibly be the standard lighting. So I did include that in the board packet, the details of that lighting. So that is the fixture style, that arbor kind of swirled style post. The color temperature in that park is the 3,000 Kelvin. So I know they're not on now, but what's in that park would be following that 3,000 Kelvin standard. And then just a couple other things to figure out is where and kind of how to place them. So along trails and walkways, adjacent to facilities and pavilions, near amenities. How do you want to space them? Where do you want them? Generally, we've had them next to pavilions and stuff like that, or at least a light on the pavilion for kind of security, but we haven't really placed them everywhere else. So just kind of adopting a standard of where we want to put these lightings. And then on top of that, it was explored as the possible of dimming, especially during after hours, that when there's no motion in the park after hours, that those lights dim to 50%. And then when a person walks underneath those, that it recognizes that motion and then kicks on to full power. Kind of more of a security issue. It really indicates that somebody is walking through that park. From an enforcement side, I would expect that would be pretty beneficial for PD to know who's out there at the same time. But let's call it aftermarket installation piece, there's about $125 piece that we can mount onto an existing pole, which has a motion sensor in it. It can do that dimming. These arbor post tops that you have in here actually have call it an add-on feature that you could have for that motion sensing dimming ability. So we can work with the supplier to just add that onto the standard pole.
Mr. President?
Yeah, Troy.
So, really what we're looking at doing is asking for a design standard for our park lighting, right?
Correct. If we wanted to continue with the one standard that was put out in the MLT park, with the 3,000 Kelvin, about where the park board thinks that they should be placed, and if they want to go forward with dimming, and including those in that standard.
Yeah. To me, this sounds like a viable standard from work that's already been done, and
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'm comfortable with moving forward with the 3,000. That's been widely adopted by every single person that's been in a conversation. It seems like a no-brainer, the 3,000 there. I just want to be clear that we're talking about only updating our lighting on new projects as they come, right? We're not talking about putting lights in our parks now, so we're not spending any money there. I do think that if we were to just go ahead and move forward with the color temperature, I think that it might be interesting to take one park and tinker with this motion sensing just to see how it goes. And I would say that we would pick our park that tends to be the one that gets the most nefarious behavior, and just see if the dimming, because I think that it actually will have an effect if kids walk into a park after hours, it's dark and the lights come up. I think it'll have an effect on some of our problem areas. So I think it might be a good thing to just pick a park and tinker with that. But other than that, I'm good with moving forward.
Yeah, I think we would just add it to our discussions as we continue park planning, right? We'd be, where do we want to put lights, right? And then, is there an option to put solar piece on the top of these? I'm assuming you guys would have checked, someone would have thought about that. A little solar piece?
We have a giant solar field as a city, so we're doing pretty well on the solar energy.
Okay. All right, looks good to me.
Solar's nice, it's just that when you get a lot of snow, then you get snow built up on it.
The concern with solar, especially in the wintertime, is the ability for it to pull enough juice to kind of carry it through the night. I don't know how much that would be available to those, especially in the parks that are very heavily wooded. Those might have a lot of challenges there.
Can't we just hang a lantern in every tree we plant?
My only comment, one of the other topics in that meeting I really enjoyed was kind of, and this was partially street focused, but limiting where light goes that's not where we want it. So really dialing it into the sidewalk or the pavilion or whatever we're trying to light. And so maybe just including that as part of this sort of lighting policy that we want to eliminate, was it overspill? I forget the...
Spillage.
Spillage, yeah. Great term. Just kind of trying to minimize that wherever we can with lights we install, especially with the LEDs and how kind of adjustable they seem to be. But yeah, totally on board with.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I may, and James, feel free to jump in, but this basically is an overlay of exactly what we've been doing on the planning and zoning side. We have already created the math for how tall they can be, how much our spillage can be, and all of that. So I feel like we've pretty much got the work done. We just need to kind of adopt what is happening on the planning and zoning side. And just remember, everyone, that this does not include ball field lighting. That's obviously a standalone item. But other than that, I think that our typical light ordinance and where we're going with that is home run, so.
I'll add to at the planning commission discussion, we talked about dimmable lighting right now. Right now, the ordinance is going to require it in commercially zoned properties for the dimmable lighting. We aren't writing it to require for parks, so that's something you could add to your policy, maybe look at it as a case study in one park. But right now, our language in the zoning code, potential ordinance language that we'd be bringing at the next meeting, would talk about requiring dimmable lighting at commercial properties.
So just to clarify, so it sounds like there's some general consensus on that fixture style that we have at the new park, that is kind of what we're thinking for future at the 3,000 Kelvin temperature standard. And I think there's just quick clarification on dimming either at one park or if we just want to adopt that as the standard throughout all of them. And then finally, to your point with placement, do we want to narrow down just kind of the general idea of where the lights go, or do we want to identify them in the master planning sessions? And if we're going to do it in that way, how do we address the ones that have been previously completed if we have to bring those back?
Mr. Chair, my idea would be that we go ahead and adopt the dimming, all of the stuff that we're doing already on the planning and zoning side. But where I was saying that we pick a park is we would actually spend the money to pick one park and see, to put the dimming in place. The other ordinance would, or the other dimming would happen as we're working on projects. So they would be at some time yet to be determined in the future. Correct? Is that right, Mr. Dean?
Correct. We would do that.
Okay.
As we get a big project, we would replace the lighting.
Do we want to pick that park today? Or just...
I'd have staff come back to us with some options, look at our lighting out there and see what might be a good candidate.
Gregory?
Sure.
Certainly enough vandalism.
Yeah, you people on the north side, you got trouble.
Rough. Can't do anything.
Or could we look under the bridge? There's probably, I know there's no electricity. That was a whole issue, but in Kiwanis.
That was a problem for sure.
It's a good idea, Kara.
How do you want to address placement? Do we want to have a general consensus of where we want to see lights, or do we want to just address them, like you mentioned, through the master planning process?
Sure, if I may, I think the placement would be on a project-by-project basis. We gotta look at where utilities are, where they're not, what the cost is per park, per project. So I think my initial feeling is we got the lights that we have now, let's switch them over to 3,000 temperature. And then as we come into projects, we look at each one with a lighting, with a lighting design. And choose where we want them for path, structure, task light, all that stuff.
Mr. President. I agree, 'cause I don't know that a dimming light in every park, where every light is needed. I mean, if some parks are not being used in the wintertime and there's no access to them, then why would we pay extra money for a dimming light? But, so agreed that, with Kevin, that just
Just real quickly also, I ran just a little math on a typical summer, and the actual hours that we would be using lighting in our parks when they're not closed before 10 o'clock, if you take from season to season, is less than 200 hours. It's not that much. So lighting is not nearly as big a deal in our parks as we really think it is. It's on the shoulder seasons is when you accumulate most of those hours, but by the time you're into June, July, and August, your park is not open at dark time.
Cool. I think you had a motion, Kevin.
Do we need a motion, or was it just discussion?
We can keep it as discussion. I can bring a more formal policy together and bring it to a future board meeting.
Perfect.
eat it all.
I'd have to actually have that make sense. That's not into that.
All right. Item 7D, MLT proposed use of remaining LCCMR funds.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. So this is a continuation of the other discussion we had with the roughly $500,000 remaining on those funds. So I have discussed a little bit with the LCCMR staff on a lot of the different things that were discussed at the last meeting. What I have not got an answer from them yet is the ability to utilize those funds for security cameras, Wi-Fi hotspots. I'm skeptical. It didn't sound very promising from my conversation with him that they would be eligible expenses. As of right now, my recommendation for what was discussed at that meeting would be the addition of a water bottle filler on the restroom building, because we do have the facilities and utilities already in that building. And we discussed the play area and the proximity to the slope into the river, so extending a little bit of a fence kind of along that the bank of the river and going up to the kind of into the slope almost. You're talking about maybe 50 to 100 feet of fencing along there, and then the potential for some art and sculptures. The art specifically was called out in the grant application as part of the scope of work, so it would be very easy for us to justify as an eligible expense. The reason why I'm recommending those items is, one, that they all would most likely fit into the scope of work of the grant, but they would be very easy to not impact the potential use of the park in 2023. And I know this contractor is looking to kind of wrap up the work and probably move on to another project. So I don't think a large change to their project scope would be well welcomed from them. So I think the water bottle filler and the extension of the fence would be pretty easy add-ons for them to take care of. And then we can work separately with the art and sculptures and figure out if that's a commission piece or if you buy it from a dealer type of thing. I guess it really depends on when you would want that piece installed type of stuff, so.
Mr. President? Jesse, going to the activity milestones, construction completion June 30th, 2023. But project closeout, June 30th, 2024.
Correct.
So that means we can extend projects with this grant until that time, correct?
Yes, we have until that deadline to expend the funds. I know CBI is most likely wanting to move on to their next project, so they're gonna wanna wrap it up after the turf establishment. I mean, we can ask them if they wanna do a bunch more work, but I'd be skeptical they'd be open to it.
And then, so I think the consensus was that we restart this project management team, correct?
MLT group.
MLT
That's my
group?
understanding, yes.
And so knowing when we, what our timeline was really important, I think, to that. But I think it also, by knowing this, identifies that we still have to move really quick here. And one of my questions that I have is, before even getting to that, so if we add, I'm just throwing this out there, if we add additional placements along the river, so for instance, heading south from the MLT park towards Kiwanis, towards that road and towards Kiwanis, if we identified a couple other areas where maybe we could have more, not necessarily not landing areas, but maybe sitting areas, and or down to the other side of that road, perhaps using some of those funds to clean up that area and add some additional, I guess what I'm kind of looking at is just areas to even maybe fish off from or just enjoy that river off from the trail itself. So as the trail's running, just a block of area where you could sit at a picnic table or something. And I know also trails it was another part of that, to an extent, a trail, which I think, I was looking at this, that I know it's difficult to go the other direction north, but man, on the north side of that, there's a lot of area where a trail could extend up and through behind those houses, and I'm just trying to think outside the box, but I think this just really needs to go to that MLT management team, but it's nice to know that we do have until, we can add on to this until June 30th of 2024, correct?
Correct, yep. And to your point, we have plenty of time to do that, and that was the other part of this, is if we're not ready to make any movements on that, we can definitely set up a date and time to reestablish that PMT group. Again, knowing that we want to utilize the park in 2023, identifying some stuff that may be low impact that wouldn't disturb operations through that year. That would be the concern. The other piece, to your point with the trail moving south, I'm not sure on the ability to use those funds outside of kind of that immediate property. It was the same discussion with the trail moving forward. The funds wouldn't go very far for the trail moving north, but the ability to use them outside of that immediate property as part of the scope.
I just have one more thought. Thank you, Mr. President. Just one thing I just want to throw out to the group here is that I want to make sure that we're asking all of the questions, and I think absolutely one of the questions that needs to be asked here is, okay, we're going to spend this $500,000. We're not only buying something to make this park nicer, we're buying something we have to maintain in perpetuity forever. Are we sure? We have a beautiful park here. It met all of our objectives. It checked all the boxes. We didn't walk out of the store feeling like we didn't get anything that we didn't want. We got everything we wanted, basically. Are we sure that as a group that we want to spend this $500,000 and impose it upon our future generations to maintain our little spending splurge at the end of this? That's all I want to throw out there. Is I've seen how budgets have worked in this park board over the past 3 or 4 years, or however long I've been on here, and I just am constantly running through my mind, everything we buy, we have to maintain every day, forever. That's all.
With that, Mr. President, with that being said, I think just as much on the other end of that, we need to look at that and say, do we have everything we need, and is there things that can be added that are low maintenance and or that are worth the maintenance that they would bring to the table? So I agree with you, but I also think we have to look at that from both ends, which to me leads back to meeting with an MLT management team and saying, because the other part of that is the people who brought this forward, that riverfront, may have some ideas and some concerns and or issues, additions that they might want to have done. And so I think we owe it to look at it from both sides of that line. I guess what I'm saying is I think the next step is to have that group get back together.
If that's the wishes of the board, give me a date and time and we'll set it up.
Yes, and are we okay with the same people being on the MLT, or does anything need to change there?
Fine by me.
I'm happy to volunteer to jump back in. You as well?
I would, I just can't do it Tuesdays, so if
Okay.
it was on a different day, other than Tuesday or Wednesday, I could do Wednesday, but not
You were on it also, right?
not Tuesday.
Stepped in for
I had to leave because of Tuesdays, I had a problem with that,
Okay.
with that time. But I would be more than willing to jump back in it if it was on a day other than Tuesday.
Generally have what you need, Jesse. Do you need a motion from us on anything?
Are we thinking maybe Wednesday the 15th? About a couple weeks from now,
It would work for me.
4 o'clock.
Yes, we have planning and zoning that night, so it's got to be before that.
What time does that start?
6.
I think we should be able to finish in an hour.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Item 7E, recommended city code revision for sale and consumption of alcohol in parks.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. So this is a follow-up from December 6th meeting, when we were discussing the amphitheater policy and the sale and consumption of alcohol in all of our parks. So when this was brought before the council and asked what their thought was, they essentially wanted to review what the park board was going to present. So at this point, we're looking at what the park board would like to see for if any revisions to the ordinance regarding sale and consumption of alcohol in city parks. Right now, it's pretty limited to Memorial Park. You can see that in the alternative. It is very convoluted in our code, but so this is kind of an opportunity for us to kind of clean this up to really what the park board wants to see. If that's the ability for anybody to any event to do sale and consumption of alcohol, and then there's no restrictions. If there's none allowed at all, and kind of keep it in the same breath as today. When this was brought up last summer, we had an alternative ordinance prepared, a draft ordinance revision. I'll give you a quick summary on this draft ordinance. It was essentially the ability to have the sale and consumption of alcohol in any of the parks, provided that is attached to an approved event. So by a club, an entity, somebody that has a liquor license that's going to be a responsible entity that can kind of organize that event, and that it's not a free-for-all, and that it is the only time that those things are allowed for the sale and consumption is at those events, and those events would come to the park board, similar to what we have later on the agenda for some event applications, that anytime that somebody is proposing having a club event that would have the sale and consumption of alcohol, that would get approved by the park board prior to the issuance of that permit. So that is kind of the general thought of what that ordinance is. So I'm just going to look for some of the thoughts on the park board and what you want us to recommend to the city council.
Go for it.
I'll jump in, just keep things moving here. Yeah, so I've done a little digging into this here, and I'm of the opinion that provided that it is attached to an organization or an entity or that, I'm all for allowing alcohol into our parks, provided that Joe says it's okay. I want to make sure that's in here somewhere. I just want to make sure Joe says this is okay. And currently we do allow consumption of beer like at Memorial Week beer, correct? So I think that would be unchanged in my opinion. We'll keep those guys happy. And we'll add in in my opinion, I think it's a good move to move in alcohol and liquor into an event as long as it's attached to an organizer. Other parks do this. Lots of parks do this.
I have a couple thoughts. I think enforcing consumption in a restricted area feels difficult. If I'm imagining arts in the park, it's like, here's a place, right, with Bloody Marys was the concept last year. Someone's going to buy that drink and then want to go mingle with the vendors and, experience the event. And I see it being difficult to limit those folks to that particular area. And I don't know if, like, we're allowing alcohol in the parks. I don't know if that advances our goals or just creates a friction point with the regulation. So I would maybe want to try it without that and then have that as a tool if we have events go poorly and feel like we need additional control. And then just my other thought is, do we need the weak beer restriction for Memorial? That feels like a very odd call out. Like if we're letting people drink beer, we're trusting them to be responsible. Does it matter if it's 3.2 or 3.5% beer?
Just have to drink more.
That just seems like an odd distinction. If we're focused on cleaning up the code, let's clean that up. Would be my thought. So.
Yeah, my question was going to be kind of similar to yours as far as like the softball games are at Memorial Park. Is that going to be considered an event? Or is it going to be an event going to be, something where you have to get a permit and all that? That would be a question. But then I think it would be great for events following all the rules if we could have all the booze, if everyone's responsible. But because we had talked about, arts in the park. I mean, beer is an art, so is wine. I mean, Five Rocks, all those, there are some really cool things that we could do, or people could do. But yeah, I would just wonder about softball games, softball tournaments. Would they then have to pull up different permits if we were going to consider letting any kind of alcohol be served there?
That's up to the park board. As of right, so they're likely not going to have a license. So that's kind of what this ordinance says is like the sale and consumption general. You have to be a licensed entity or a club that has that on-sale liquor license. So if you wanted to allow Memorial Park, we wouldn't have those additional requirements tied to it. You could just allow the same 3.2 or just full weight beer for the Memorial Park softball events if you wish.
Mr. President?
Yeah.
Katie, can you shed some light on this and the events that we've had at the softball fields, which I think is the only place that we've had it, correct? In our parks?
I think in reference to the tournament, this one's for Hop. They always had
Right.
the Brainerd JCs come in and sell, so that's where this would be relevant, I think, because of the Brainerd JCs.
They're licensed, correct?
Yes.
To do this, yes. Yeah, so with that being said, I think that's where you were alluding to before, right? Is that they're licensed to do this. I think if we have that and we have that they have to, fill out a form an event form and that we know that it's going on and we approve it. I agree with Andrew that, I don't think it just has to be weak beer. I think, and Kara as well, that, open it up. If we know what's going on and, we can kind of monitor how things go. And if Mayor Bedeau gets out of hand, we can just talk with him, but that's his.
I get out of hand for other reasons. So want to clarify, because I feel like it's important. Community action, when we asked for this last year, we were under the assumption that was an allowed use. So want to be very clear, community action is not interested in being a driving force behind this. We are only interested in operating within the set limitations that the city has. So if it's allowed, we'll use it. If it's not allowed, we won't. So we're not interested in being the driving force trying to get this to happen. But, you know, there are uses that we could see it being something that we'd be interested in. We absolutely have talked about that specifically, and that if it was something we were gonna do, we would probably try and tie it to some type of art, if it was for arts in the park. We would try to have local brewers. We have, you know, Sean from Yasha Kombucha, which is a very similar process, not alcoholic, but very similar process. That's an art form. So we think it would be something we would be interested in. But again, we're definitely not looking to be a driving force, and we will operate within whatever regulations the city deems necessary. For clarification, though, booze is not allowed at Memorial Park. Beer is not allowed at Memorial Park. It is only allowed by a vendor baseball team. We are operating outside of our own code with that anyway. So I just want to make sure we're clear on that we need to make sure we're getting the code to where it should be so that it is operating within the parameters that we are setting forth.
I had one more question for Katie. Are there issues with softball and beer right now?
Define issue. They drink beer. It happens. I think they're under the impression it has to be 3-2 beer. Is it 3-2 beer? Most likely not. That's all I have to say. I don't know. Have we had a lot of incidents where I feel like I need to call the cop for drunkenness? I think over the past 9 years, we've had maybe 2 instances where a cop should have been called. So I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Yeah, I just tie it to some of the sportsmanship issues you've reported.
Yeah.
And
Overconsumption happens, especially with sports and how that impacts tension. So, yeah. I don't know. I don't know where you want me to go with this or what you want me to say, but it happens.
Just to Dave's point, as we're looking at making the code match reality, like, is it something we want to be allowing, or is it maybe causing some problems that we don't love?
I don't know. There are complexes that have a gated facility, that they have a better job of like monitoring what goes in and out. We don't. People will bring their coolers no matter what. They'll disguise it in however they want. Beer and softball have gone together for many, many years. I'm not saying because we've always done it, it needs to keep that way, but I do feel like if we were to say no more alcoholic beverages at Memorial Park, we might get an upswing on some people that are like sober, but I think a lot of teams would fold. That's my opinion.
Solve the light issue.
Yeah.
And just to clarify your point, Mr. Chair,
It sounds like we just need a beer tax.
in the draft ordinance as it's written, to your point of somebody picking up like a Bloody Mary and then walking around the park. So the way the ordinance is written is sale and consumption is within either a contained area like a building or at least a temporary fenced area. So it has to stay within there as the ordinance is written. Now, again, if the park board wishes to make adjustments to this and say, as long as you are at a vendor, we don't necessarily need the containment. I think if from a police enforcement issue, that's where the challenge is, the potential for other problems.
So I would just like to add that the council is really leaning on the park board to see what your interest is. So if you're interested in having that be the case, that you have carte blanche and you can move around, I would recommend presenting it as such, and then the council can come back and put whatever restrictions it wants. That's when the police department can chime in. From this group, I think you decide what you envision would be good, present that to them, they'll take it from there.
Mr. President.
Troy.
Again, I think a sanctioned event, they fill out their registration form. We know what's going on. I personally don't think that it should be you know, a restricted, if you're gonna have it in that park, they can go anywhere in the park with what they purchase, but that's just my opinion on it. I could go either way.
I'll just jump in and keep things moving. I'm gonna say basically the same thing. I think it's generally, my feeling is that for certain events, we should allow alcohol sale and use and inside kind of the parameters of our park. Again, I think that the legal side of this is a huge factor for us to think about, the, you know, what we might be getting ourselves into as a city. And also gonna say that I'm not willing to rewrite an ordinance that allows our softball players to have it on out there every single night. So I think that the one that we have now is about correct.
I also agree that, with what you guys said, let everybody roam if that's what their permit says. I do wonder though, if we have, like, how do we ID people, or, you know, is that something we decide later, or is that, you know, right now, if you go to an event, you're in a fenced-in area, you're usually ID'd, I guess, unless someone sneaks in, or they get a bracelet or something. I mean, do we need to be worried about that piece of it? Or again, is that the permit holder that has to decide? Yes, okay, yep, okay. So, yeah.
And we will clarify if the contained area is something that is flexible. It may not be, but we'll clarify that with the attorney.
I just had one last question. We're not going to require that the event holder has the liquor license, that they're operating with someone with a liquor license, correct? Okay, I just want to make sure that we're clear on that.
Whoever's selling it.
Who's ever selling it, yes. Okay, perfect.
Not the organizer, the seller. The organizer could bring in sellers.
Thank you.
Yep.
Oh, another
It's no
comment.
different than food, in my opinion, it's no different than food. The organizer has food trucks come in, they're the ones responsible for their food, and to me, it shouldn't be any different.
Lastly, the number 6 here, if this is like what happens and we're gonna have the police officer be hired at the cost of the event, I think just to be kind, it might be nice to know what that price would be per head, or how many, you know, certain amount of people, 500 people equals 4 police or something. Just so people know when they're putting their event permit in, okay, well, it's gonna be an additional this much if we decide to do liquor.
Right. It would likely be an hourly cost, I'm sure.
Okay.
Give them a beer.
What?
After.
Has that ever been followed? I mean, has law enforcement been hired for any event? I highly doubt they've been hired at any of our ball fields. Correct, Katie?
Not to my knowledge. We do have a good working relationship where if there's an issue, we call them and they show up.
That about what you're looking for, Jesse?
If the intention is the park board generally agrees with the draft, with the exception of the containment piece of that, I can vet that through the attorney, but that will be what we present to the council, if that's what you wish.
Yep.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. Halfway done. 7F, approved joint workshop of Park Board and Brainerd City Council.
All right, should be a quick one here. So at the last council meeting, the council approved a date and time of February 27th at 6 p.m. This is just for both the park board and the city council to jointly meet and have a workshop to discuss just procedures in regards to the operating and capital budgets specifically for the upcoming year. And just maybe some other discussions as well with expectation and presentation throughout the budget process. So this is just between the two boards and making sure we establish this, and then we obviously would put out public notice that the park board would be present in whole.
Thoughts, concerns?
Yeah, no questions. Motion to approve, Yeager.
Second. Kara's got it.
Any discussion? All opposed, or, okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. All right, next item is the Two Paddles event.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. So this is a second annual event. The Two Paddles are out of the metro, and what they do is they hold essentially a kayak launch event out of the Lum Park area, and they just kind of meander their way down the river. They are expecting about 100 or so participants this time. So generally what they do is they arrange the kayaks at the beach in the pavilion area and then just have a large scale launch after their little event. They have a little event in the morning and then a launch, and then they have helpers that will end up moving vehicles and kind of assisting along the way as they go down the river. So after they launch, they do kind of clear everything out so that way it's not kind of left behind after they're gone. So because of the size and that they may use some sound application with a microphone at that time, we're asking that the park board does approve that.
They're going downriver? I'm just curious.
They'll go upriver. They could go downriver
Yeah, they could
with,
for a little
with a
ways.
great deal of rapidity at one point also.
Was there any feedback from this year's event? I mean, was there any issues or anything we should be aware of?
I don't think we had any issues last year. I think what they're intending for future years is they've gotten some positive feedback from the participants, and they expect this to grow substantially. I think they were mentioning the number of 200 to 300. I think if they get to the 200 to 300 participant, they'll have to come together with a really good plan of how they're going to facilitate that event. That's a lot of kayaks and participants and not a ton of space. So how they fill that space if they get there. But as of right now, they're still kind of at that 100 participant area.
Motion to approve, Yeager.
Second, Miller.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. That is approved. Next is the Pride event at Gregory Park.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. So again, another event, significant amount of people. So this one's about 250 participants on Saturday, the 9th of September. Generally, it's 8 to 5, but they do have some staggering of that use of the park. So it would essentially be all day, but they have a lot of different things that they're looking for. So you can see it in the permit what they're asking for, but generally due to its size, the sound amplification with the DJ, they're wanting to bring in some vendors, putting in a bounce house and potentially a dunk tank depending on the weather. We wanted to make sure again that Park Board did approve this application for the event.
I just had one question, Jesse. I didn't see any mention of liability insurance, but with like a bouncy house and stuff, that made me think maybe that's something we'd want them to have.
We would want them to have a liability insurance. And I think the same thing goes for the Two Paddles events. We would request that they have a liability insurance that they provide us.
I just don't think it's on the form, right?
I don't think so. I think that would be a,
It's just not on the form.
It was like something you follow up with them after.
yeah.
Cool. Cool.
It looks like they have the pavilion from 10 to 5, but the rest of the area they want until 10 p.m. Is that just a mistake or they plan to hang out?
Yeah,
after?
Just in our system. It just reserves it for the whole day, but they're just 10 to 5.
Got it, okay.
Cool. Oh, I did love the note too that for Gregory, parking's not allowed in the park. That made me happy. Nice.
Big J's is there, I'm in. Motion to approve, Yeager.
Second, Miller.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. All right. Next, we have the field maintenance agreements with lots of Bs in a single A.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. So it's almost the exact same agreements as last year, only we changed the year. This is allowing those two entities to be able to utilize our maintenance equipment to maintain the fields as they use them and kind of help with those efforts as they utilize our fields at their cost.
I mean, Mr. President.
Yes, please.
So, when I seen this in the agenda, I called people from the association. I talked to Troy Harris. I talked to Joe Polkamp, who runs the community ed, baseball and softball. Him and Corey Lund run that. And no issues whatsoever. The minor issues we had last year, we worked through, in real time, and, everything went really well. And as a matter of fact, the association this year has been, every one of their tournaments, they're now qualifiers for both MIAS and MSF, which is probably gonna bring in even more teams, especially moving forward from year to year. People do like to come here, so I think this agreement greatly helps them out. In reality, actually helps us out too, because last year, the association had to pay more, almost twice what they paid the year before, because we had to use full-time staff. We didn't have a lot of temporary staff that could help out with these events. So there was overtime and, so even the city paid a little more, which we transferred that money onto the association, and they paid that. I think it was $3,900 versus $2,500 the year before. So it gives them the option to do more of that maintenance themselves during those tournaments, especially if they're expanded. And it looks like they want to use more of the fields and JCs this year than they did last year. Katie, Steve said he talked to you a little bit as well, and so it's expanding. So I think it's a good agreement for both sides, and really kind of opens things up. But I did do some checking, and it sounds like there's really no issues.
Katie?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, member of the board. We had a meeting with community education, and I just wanted to preface that the ability to drag in line after a practice, we had a couple situations last year where it was right before like a game for our community ed baseball leagues, and it was causing some issues. So we are going to move forward, I believe, with only allowing on game days for people to practice early in the morning, which would allow our staff then to go through. But right before a game, it wasn't really giving a good vibe for the kids that are showing up for their rec league baseball. So we did talk to Joe about that, and I think we should move forward with that. So I don't know. That's just something I wanted to mention to you guys, that we had that conversation.
Yeah, if I may, Mr. President. I know exactly what day you're talking about. They actually called me, and I had to go down there with my keys so they had actually given their key to one of their other coaches, and so I went down and opened it up so they could redress the field and prep for the Pony League game that was coming up. And I did just reiterate to Steve Hansen that community ed takes precedence, that those community ed games take precedence, and that they need to follow their schedule. And, if they're gonna move something in, they have to get approval. And the main reason for that, in my opinion, and this is what I told Steve Hansen from the BBBA, was that we don't want our staff to dress the fields and then someone come in after and tear that field up, and then sure, they can redress it, but if that's the case, our staff doesn't even need to go there ahead of time. Just go and dress it yourself, and then redress it, and everything's good. That way, staff can go and do. If you guys want them to do something other than dress a field, you can do that. To me, it's. So anyway, I told him yesterday. I said, just make sure that. And I emphasized that to him after that incident. So I don't think there'll be an issue. So I think we can easily move ahead with this. And I did tell him we had someone replacing Kim, so make sure you have enough heads up on what's going on, so.
Oh, very good. Based on past success and testimony, I'll make a motion to approve.
Second Miller.
Any nope, yeah, okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. It's approved. Next up, discussion on park planning.
Mr. President, I apologize. I have to leave. I have to be somewhere at 6, so.
Totally. Yeah, this is a doozy of an agenda. We're on a real run here.
Hoping we can wrap it
it's
up pretty
Miller's
quick
fault.
for you. So. So,
Personally
Mr.
asked
Chair,
for
this conversation on planning actually came up by a couple board members. So just kind of laying out what the spring, summer looks like for capital planning and developing that 30-year capital plan. So I just kind of listed the master planning on parks that have not been completed and potentially some that have to be finalized. So we talked Lum Park has to be finalized yet and adopted, and maybe relooking at the one from Memorial. And see how that needs to be changed or not. And then once that work has been completed, what does the development of the capital plan look like? Identifying the major investments that are going to be required and when do those fall into place. And then again, figuring that out and rolling it into a 30-year plan. So I'm just kind of looking for direction from the park board of how you want to lay that out. If that's every 2 weeks in between park board meetings to address 2 to 3, maybe 4 potentially of the park's master plans to be adopted at the following park board meeting until they're completed, and then start working through the development of the capital plan.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm on board with that. I looked at, so remind me, the capital, and this might change in February, but the presentation to the council for capital budget's like end of July?
So we have an, I'll call it an initial budget that we have to present to the council, and we'll have that discussion with them in late February of what that expectation, what they want to see for a timeline. But generally in the spring, we've proposed an initial capital budget, and then it gets reaffirmed we have to do it before August 31st. So most likely at the August park board meeting, we'll come up with a formal recommendation of what the parks operating and capital budgets will be to be presented to the city council.
Cool. Yeah, so I just kind of worked back from that. And so,
From April or from August?
from August.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that'd be pure chaos. Every night, guys, we're gonna do it. So we kind of have 3 meetings to sort out the capital impact of our plans, and then 3 more meetings to finish the plans. So I just sketched out February, March, April. We're finishing the plans we've looked at, and then the rest of the parks. And then May, June, July, kind of off cycle with our board meetings. We'd be identifying the capital expenses, getting numbers for that, and then spreadsheetizing. We're going to say that's a word.
So to kind of go along with this, I was going to bring this up in my staff updates, but I feel like we need to revisit concessions and where maybe some changes could be made or eliminated, or things, maybe having a planning meeting that includes concessions and what that could look like. So that would definitely go along with this, because that could be could add money to the budget, take it away, like there could be some things. So I'd like to just add that now. But whatever the schedule, I'll be there.
Cool.
Yeah.
Kate.
Jesse, is there a way you could draft up a potential schedule of what this would all look like, including the parks we haven't done master planning for, and then adding the capital improvement, like just a schedule so we can like all mark it on our schedules and make sure we're available?
If that's the general consensus of the park board, that's what we'll do, is we'll lay out kind of the next several months of meeting dates with what we're targeting to accomplish at those meetings. If that's master planning for parks XYZ, and then once we get through all the master plans, then how do we develop the 30-year capital plan?
Okay.
Very similar to how you have it laid out in your email. So we'll lay out a draft plan, and if everybody's good with that, we'll put it on the schedule for everybody.
Awesome.
I'm good with that. It's not a motion item, so we're good to move. I think we're good to move ahead.
Keep it on. MLT grand opening / ribbon cutting. Katie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is more of a formal agenda request to you all on gathering what you guys want, what it could look like. In my summary, I just I need kind of a consensus on the date. Do we want to do it Saturday, June 3rd? The time is flexible, but we thought around the midday. We thought utilizing every aspect of the park during the event would be appropriate. The actual ribbon cutting would happen in the beginning of the event and have a guest speaker, mayor ideally, and then all the people that were instrumental in the creation of that park would be invited, and obviously the public also. But they would be invited to show that we respect all of their work. And then I'm just open to ideas on what you guys are looking for, and then also because this wasn't necessarily a budgeted special event item, the budget that you guys are looking for on that, if there is a budget, or if you know of fundraising sources that we could look into. Thoughts? Questions?
I like the idea of showcasing all the things that are available at the park. So probably not bouncy houses. I don't have kids though, but just trying to utilize the things that they will continuously be able to do at the park. So I like the education idea.
Okay.
And then, yeah, the paddleboarding, canoeing, that could be really cool to have someone talk about that. Food and beverage stuff, I mean, it would be cool to have like more of like, this is maybe where we could have our liquor sampling if it goes through, or I don't want to say high-end stuff, but not cheese curds.
Okay, so you're thinking more of a vendor, not a food truck.
Yeah, but I'm not sure what, but just kind of, again, not making this like the snooty park, but just kind of like, really want to do like all natural, or like, again, I can't think of any food trucks though, because they don't really exist.
You were thinking maybe, were you mentioning catering it maybe instead of a food truck?
Yeah, that could be something possible.
Where can we get this money from, Jesse?
Yeah.
We could potentially request it from the city council. That is something I think that we would be more than willing to ask them if they would be open to allowing some additional funding. I know there's different spots where that money could come from, but it would be from the general fund that they would have to allocate to the park board. We could try and find it somewhere else in the existing operating budget and try to make some cuts out elsewhere, but that one's going to be a little bit tougher because we were pretty sharp with our pencil when we did our operating budget, so I don't think there's a lot of flexibility there, but I think that would be something that we could request from the city council. I would advise that we come up with a solid budgetary number first, and we can figure that out if we identify the band first, and kind of, if that's something that you guys want to do, is do a band at the amphitheater and then kind of come up with the number from there and then ask.
I feel like we should talk to Don a little bit about this because he's in the music world and he's a big driver between this whole park. We're going to be having this MLT meeting. I think we should just bring this up right off the bat. Just say, hey, what do you guys think? And we could come back. But I think what we're hearing is maybe a nicer, more upscale event here if we can find a way to get the money. So,
Yeah, the general nature of the event sounds great. Let's show off the cool park.
Yeah.
do your thing, Katie.
Okay, so are we in consensus on the date at least? And then we're gonna talk to Don at the MLT meeting and then go from there?
Yeah, I have no trepidations with the date other than if we are pretty sure that we're going to be done. That's the only
So
thing.
that's the reason I picked the June 3rd. I wanted to allow at least a good couple months of good weather for them to kind of wrap everything up with the turf establishment and stuff. That was my concern. I know the stuff that they seeded last fall actually took really well. So everything else is essentially going to be rolled turf grass. So we're not going to have to wait for that to establish. So we should be able to utilize it by June 3rd unless we have just an incredibly cold spring and it doesn't thaw out until like mid-May. But I wouldn't anticipate that. So I think June 3rd was a pretty safe date.
Okay.
That's not graduation, right? I think we talked, that's the next weekend? Do we know that? Or, I mean, graduation's like on Friday. Wait, yeah.
Wouldn't they love to have graduation at that park?
What?
Wouldn't they love to do graduation at that park?
Maybe, the night before, yeah. I don't know. I could probably look up when Brainerd graduation is.
It's close to
Maybe it wouldn't
graduation.
affect it.
It's really close.
That Friday. Just like the night before. Or
That
the
might
day
be an
after.
issue for like prep. I mean, would there be anything to prep the night before, set up? I mean, that's gonna be so busy right along there. Maybe not the park, but I don't know. Maybe it wouldn't matter.
I think the band would probably be the only thing that would potentially have to set up the day before if we had to put up maybe some signage. It should be pretty minimal about the day before.
It doesn't start till 11. They have plenty
We
of
have a lot
time.
of time in the
Yeah.
morning too.
That's true. Okay, just throwing it out there.
Should offer New Park to probably folks from out of town too.
Yeah.
Okay.
I say we move forward with reserving the facility that day.
Okay.
And then we'll confirm a little bit more of the details of what we're doing once we talk to MLT.
Okay. Yeah.
Excellent. That is all of our new business, but we have these maps in front of us, Jesse. Was that
Yes, sir. I was going to cover it in my report.
cool? Before that public forum, we will open the public forum at 5:50 p.m. Is there anyone online, Brent? Neat. We'll close the public forum at 5:50 p.m. It's really satisfying. Okay. Board member reports. Carrie, you mentioned you had something? Or
Oh,
you
yeah.
mentioned-
I
there
just
you
was
go.
mentioning concessions and just investigating that more. That's what I was gonna say.
Cool. Kevin?
One quick thing, the park, the ice rink has been getting a lot of use, both Gregory and as well as Memorial. So hats off to all our staff for keeping it open. Good work, everyone. That's all.
Yeah, I think I've actually really loved all the updates through social media just to build awareness for how the rinks have been during these times, because obviously it hasn't been as cold as we maybe anticipated during this time. So those updates have been really great.
I've got two things. The string lights at Gregory are still my favorite thing
Yeah.
I think we've ever done in the park. And then, we had a meeting with Rotary about some solar plans. I'll say there was maybe some crossed wires, but I think we have a good plan going forward. I think it'll be on a future agenda, but just it happened, so we're making headway. Everybody wants solar. It's gonna be cool. Oh yeah, that's it for me. Staff reports.
I will start. Thank you, Mr. Chair. All right, so outdoor skating rinks, warming houses, adult pond hockey, that's been underway. We did purchase some scoreboard, little flip chart thingies. That seemed to be a good solution, very cheap and inexpensive, and they're happy with it. There's been with the 3-day weekends, it's been a little trying. Come Tuesday, if we have to clear rinks, we don't exactly get to flood them. So Tuesday, adult pond hockey can be challenging, but they're getting through it. And then youth pond hockey, a lot of good stuff going on there. I think we have a date for the Jamboree picked out, and that's where they get to play in the Essential Health Sports Center. So excited about that. We did purchase new jerseys, and that's the logo that we got on the jerseys. So pretty classic, just nice. And so that was nice. We spent about half is what we thought we were going to do we didn't go with a sublimation jersey, and so we used the other half then to help pay for some new equipment and helmets that have been basically dangerous to keep in rotation. So awesome, win-win there. So a lot of people are really happy with that. Warming houses and the attendance. We've just struggled through some hiring stuff. There's been some background check situations where it's been taking a really long time to get those back. So we've been working through that, but we finally got like our last person hired. So he starts this Saturday. Excited about that. We had, let's see what else. That's basically the summation there. We got through it. We're getting through it. It's trying to get good help, but we have a lot of really committed workers. Skating rinks, we have had record numbers confirmed. I will be obviously giving you guys a report at the end of the season, but I mean, be a combination of being open that winter break week, the warmer weather temperatures. I don't know, like everyone's just got that itch to skate right now. I mean, we're averaging 100+ people a night, so it's great. At all the rinks, actually, not just our main ones. There's still like large numbers going to Bain also. So very excited about that. There is some ice challenges at Memorial still. The north side still melts, but we're getting through it each day that we do get to flood. We're fixing it, so it's lasting the night, but it's the weekends where it's a little bit more hard because we don't have staff that floods on the weekends, right? So we just kind of hope that on Saturday, if they have games there, that the rink's in good condition. And then special event, we've got the Valentine's Day skating party coming up Sunday, February 12th from 1 to 4. This is just a free skating opportunity for the public. Come together, spread love. I don't know. It's a lot of fun. We have everything's free for them. So we have Wendy's, chili, hot dogs, hot cocoa. All the loaning system's still free, and it's a good event that is really well appreciated by Mike Paget, who's like a local celebrity at Gregory Park, but he loves that event. So, and then I forgot to mention that Smooch-a-Pooch. The idea this year was we're just gonna put out the Smooch-a-Pooch kissing booth in the timid dog section at the dog park, and people can utilize it for a week and then it's gone. So yes, that's all I have. Thank you.
Katie, did we get that equipment that we purchased with that grant, or?
No.
No, we didn't?
Well, I don't know. We haven't received whether or not we've received that grant yet.
Oh, okay.
No,
So
and we
for
did
next
have.
year's.
We received a donation from, I think it's the Women of Today, and we used some of that money to purchase some new skates also. So,
Yeah, I thought it was like we had to rush and decide what we wanted because we were gonna get it for this year, or no?
Well, we had to rush to get the application in.
Oh, okay.
Correct.
Yes.
Yep. So we have not heard back on the results of that application yet.
the $5,000 was put into the budget to get the jerseys and get the program up to snuff. So we have some new equipment. It's not enough for everybody, but it's a start.
If we do get awarded,
That's for
It'll
mostly
replenish.
skates. Where I don't think it can be used, if the grant is awarded, it can't be for an organized program. It's for like free to the public type things. That's why we mentioned the sleds and the skates and the,
The training, skate trainers.
oh yeah, the skate helpers, so.
Pucks.
Yeah. Pucks, you said?
Oh, I just saw your note that.
Oh, we did buy pucks also. That was our request that we received. So we now have some hockey pucks at Bain Park and Memorial Park for the public, but they have to turn it back in. We'll see how long they last.
So in the maintenance report, you kind of see general maintenance is clearing rinks and keeping them ready to go for skating, maintaining the warming houses, clearing of snow throughout all the park system. They have been nice enough to help me out in a couple sticky spots on some streets where we had parked cars that wouldn't allow the equipment go through. So Parks was nice enough to go use their little pickup plow and clear some streets for us. So that was helpful, especially when it was pretty bad last snowfall events. So general, a lot of snow removal equipment or snow removal operations and maintaining it for the pond hockey and stuff. A couple other items. We did have a request for memorial bench at the new MLT park. So I kind of wanted to gauge what the park board's opinion is on memorial trees, memorial benches at the new park. If that's something that we wanted to continue to allow at any park, including this one, or if the park board doesn't want to see a lot of benches and trees put at that park, that policy gets rewritten to exclude that park.
Maybe we ask the MLT team. Maybe we ask, you guys are
Not a
meeting.
bad plan.
I think, did we change our policy so that we have control where they go?
We do.
So we can at least put them,
Both on trees and benches. We changed that quite some time ago.
I thought we had some planned benches. I wonder if we could just swap one of the planned benches for one of these memorial? Or
I
the
mean, we
benches
could
are-
probably swap them out, yeah. We do have some out there currently, as part of the plan, but I mean, that's up to you guys if that's what you'd like to do instead of, what you had in the plan originally. I think it's that nice black crisscross steel benching, I think is what it was.
Is what we had over there, but the memorial benches are the wooden, they look like wood. They got the name engraved in the back of them.
So if you start swapping those out,
That's my
do you
concern.
have two different types of benches out in that park?
Yeah.
Is there a specific reason that they chose that park?
Because it's awesome.
Well, I mean, yeah, other than that, it's like new and cool, but
I don't remember what the reasoning was. Carrie, can you?
She was a student at the high school, and so I think her grandma just wanted it close to the park.
I think Mike.
One thing that I'll just throw out is what a lot of parks do is instead of having the memorial bench where it's like etched into the back, you still have our matching bench, but in the concrete that goes underneath them, you cut in just a little paver or some type of a little something right underneath the bench, which may be not as obtrusive and as big of a deal. So something to think about. But maybe we should put this on the EMLT Ask agenda because they're a critical part of the design of this park as well.
No, we can ask them what they'd like to see in when it comes to memorial benches. It just came up, and I didn't know if the park board wanted to see a whole bunch of scattered memorial benches all over that park. So before we start allowing them, I wanted to make sure we clarified that policy before we start allowing.
I don't think we want any benches scattered over any of our parks anymore. We want people to be able to sit, but we want to make sure it's planned.
Placed, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
I know there's not a lot of spare space in that park either. So that again, another concern was how many becomes clutter. The other piece of the maintenance side is, and this goes into the concessions discussion. So again, looking at the grander vision of what concessions looks like in all of our park system. So we had just recently, this last year, an inspection by the Department of Health. They called out the flooring is starting to chip. So generally, we just paint the floor, which is not conducive with the Department of Health. So we, surprising enough, so they did call it out that we have to resolve that issue. So we did have a vendor. Somebody I ran into at a recent conference in November that does epoxy flooring. So I had them come up and take a look at a few of the facilities. So at Memorial Park, the concession area, the storage area that where we store some food, and the JC's concession area. Generally, it was between $8,000 to $10,000 each facility. So again, this is back to that bigger conversation of we have to continue to maintain these facilities. If we want several different concession stands, that is just a cost that we have to make sure that we have to have several pieces of equipment. We have to maintain the epoxy flooring lasts for a while, but eventually that needs to be redone as well as the power to supply that and storing food. So again, for our future discussion as we do capital planning, what does concessions look like at our parks? Do we consolidate, or do we really want to continue to maintain all
Hot
of
dog
them?
and chip special for the day is $31.
How many dogs do we have to celebrate for the flooring?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was like a lot of things. It was a little bit more I was expecting for a cost, but I guess I can't be too surprised. Now, obviously, that was from an out of town vendor. Maybe somebody local might be a little bit cheaper, but I'm anticipating it's going to be right in that ballpark. So, really quick updates on Kiwanis Park. So Kiwanis Park, the outside of the building is generally done. The only exception is paint. Obviously, they can't paint in the cold weather, so we're going to wait till spring for that. The interior of the building is getting painted right now. And as soon as that paint is done, they'll get to plumbing fixtures and electrical. So we're wrapping up Kiwanis pretty quick. It'll end up dragging to spring just at least for the painting side of it. But it is looking pretty sharp. Same thing with the MLT park. They've got most of the upper structure done. So the soffit, the fascia, the tongue and groove ceilings, those are all wrapped up. Some of the things that they do need to finish yet is the stonework around the base of the columns on the buildings, and the restroom still needs an awful lot of work yet on the inside. A little bit on the outside too, but so they are still progressing through that, but I would anticipate that that should wrap up pretty quickly too. They've been progressing really well. I'm not sure how the upcoming forecast will affect that, how much they want to do outside when it is 0 degrees for a high. So they've been pretty blessed with a nice mild winter so far, so I'm not sure how that'll affect it, but I would anticipate that they wrap up pretty quickly too with that. Memorial lights, just a quick update on that. So we got some costs from Holden and Starry Electric, I'll call it the preferred subcontractor from Musco Lighting out of Foley. Generally, between the two, so to try and balance these out, because Starry included replacing the wire and conduit all the way down and replacing the electrical panels. Now, we do have problems with the electrical panels too, but to include all of that together, they were generally at about $40,000 a piece. I know you talked about 30, but that also didn't include the wire conduit and the electrical panels. That was just the lighting, ballast and fixtures. So if you include the conduit, wire, and the panels, you're talking about 40. Generally, both vendors gave us about the same cost. So we have not yet talked with BPU and had them do an evaluation. I can't imagine they're going to be much different. I think their recommendation is you can either replace everything and get it on the same level, or you can replace the only ones that are out. That's my assumption is what they'll come up with, but we have not had them do an evaluation yet. So after we have that discussion with them, we'll figure out if that's what the park board wants to do, is go ahead and replace the everything for the 40,000. Originally, we had budgeted 50 for all that work and trying to maintain them through this year. So that's the update with the cost on that one. And then the exhibits that you guys have, this is just a quick update. So we've been working with Widseth on developing the plans for the State Park Road Account project. So this is just kind of the latest exhibit that we have. Just a quick reminder, reclaiming most of Lum Park Road, and then it's just a mill and overlay on the boat launch road. A little bit of extra pavement on the boat trailer storage parking area, and then just a quick loop around for the RV dump site. So just a little bit of extra paving there, as well as the trail that goes throughout and then ends kind of on the other side of the boat parking. We originally had like a small pedestrian bridge as an alternative option in this layout. Based on cost, it was about another $50,000 to go that route. Because this project has already grown in cost compared to what we had originally in the DNR's grant, we went with the option of bringing it closer to the road and just extending the box culvert under the road. So not necessarily a pedestrian bridge, which would have probably been more aesthetic, but it is still functional having the culvert extension here. So with what we're proposing now, we can generally get this to fall within the DNR's budget. We still have a significant local investment that we have to put into it, just under, maybe a little under 200,000 that we have to put in there for everything else not part of the State Park Road. But this is something we're still kind of working with Widseth to develop those plans. And that's the end of my report.
Cool. Our last item is to adjourn.
We're actually adjourning to a regular meeting, not a special meeting, right?
I think we would like to schedule one for mid-February, but
If you want to schedule the February special park meeting for the first, let's call it initial master planning, we can set that date now and adjourn to that. So if you wanted to follow
7th, right?
general, yeah, it would be the 7th at 4.
that works for me. don't know if that'll work for Troy. He said Tuesdays were not great, but
Say it's like an hour or something? I can come if it's like, we try to keep it to a regular time. 'Cause I'll be leaving for the cities that day to fly out the next day to get out of town.
We usually get through our, that's just for park planning, or no,
Yeah.
yeah, park planning, yeah, we usually get through those pretty quick, and we're down to the kind of the easy parks, to be honest.
and this one's like approving
Yeah,
Memorial and
yeah, and Lum, yeah.
so those usually go real fast.
So February 7th at 4?
Yep,
Tuesday, February 7th?
motion to adjourn to the February 7th at 4 meeting.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.